is a small example I can give personally of how he just made people feel respected, and so here's that moment, even though it's very cringeworthy for me to listen back to.
You're listening to the PuckUps Podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian D. Felice.
Welcome into episode 48 of the PuckUps Podcast. I am Brian D. Felice, and thank you all for joining me. The Boston Bruins made a huge trade, so make sure to smash that subscribe button and share this video to everybody that you know. I'm just kidding. Don't do that unless you want to. It's a minor trade we'll talk about. There was some other movement around the league we'll touch on as well. And I want to talk about Patrice Bergeron, as his number is being raised to the Garden Rafters, to no surprise of anybody. But that was announced, and I want to discuss Bergeron as well. But first things first, if you haven't done so already, all joking aside, please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcast. And to get in touch with me or be a part of the show, you can email me, info@thepuckups.com. Tweet at me on X at Brian D. Felice _. You can tweet at the show at the PuckUps, or leave a comment on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, anywhere the show has a social media account and post content. As I mentioned off the top in a joking manner, the Boston Bruins did make a very small trade, not a major trade, no clickbait here, none of that. It's Andre Gasso, and the Bruins traded the rights of Andre Gasso to the San Jose Sharks, along with Boston's 4th round pick in 2026, which was 120 overall. And in return, the Bruins get San Jose's 4th round pick in 2026, which is 104 overall. So the Bruins move up 16 spots in the 4th round. And they also get San Jose's 5th round pick in the 2026 draft. So Boston now has a 1st, a 2nd, a 3rd, 3/4, which they had before, but they just moved up positioning in one of them, and now 2 5th round picks. So a small trade for the Bruins. And ultimately, my thoughts on this are, yes, it's fair to question, just generally speaking, around Andre Gasso. Like, why do younger players not feel like they can get opportunity to start their career in Boston, or break through in Boston or Providence, whatever? And I think with Gasso, him wanting the Bruins to waive, or burn, I should say, the first year of his ELC at the end of BC's season last year, honestly, I think for the player and prospect he was a bit of a tall ask. I don't think the Bruins were wrong in not burning the first year of his deal. He's a 4th line projected player. He's not exactly James Hagan. So the ask was a bit out there from Gasso's perspective. I can understand him wanting to do it, but the team, there was no reason for them to do that. So the result of that is the player turning around and saying, all right, well, can you guys find a place for me elsewhere? Because or else I'm going to try to, test free agency. So that's what ended up happening here. The Bruins got something for a player that ultimately was never going to play for them. And the deal in a vacuum, there's not much to say on it other than it's not a bad deal for the Bruins. It's a perfectly fine deal. I know there's some out there who question Boston's drafting and developing anyway. So what good are draft picks? Well, that's the business, and collecting draft collateral is always a good thing, whether it's to use it for yourself and hopefully start to change your fortunes in the draft, or use it as, trade chips. You see 4th round picks and 5th round picks all the time as part of as a very small part, albeit of a trade package. So it's never a bad thing to collect draft capital. It just isn't. So that's the minor trade I wanted to get to right off the bat in terms of the Bruins. And there is some movement around the NHL that we've been expecting. Okay, last episode I did what was in my estimation, a realistic off-season game plan if I were Don Sweeney, based on where the Bruins are at, where they're trying to address, and what players could be out there to be had. Some of those moves have already happened, and not exactly to the way that I predicted. But Andre Gasso is an example, right? I predicted Gasso and Yoki Haru. I didn't predict it. It was a mock-up of what they could do, right? But I think I said Gasso and Yoki Haru to Vancouver for a 3rd round pick. And the rights to Gasso have been traded, as I mentioned. It wasn't to Vancouver. It wasn't for a third-round pick, but it's in the ballpark, right? I mean, he got back a mid-round pick and a fifth-round pick for him and a fourth-round pick. So Gasso's gone. Another move in my offseason mock-up for the Bruins that I predicted that Don Sweeney might try to do was to sign UFA right shot defenseman Darren Raddysh. That is no longer possible because the Toronto Maple Leafs have traded for him. Even though Raddysh was an impending UFA on July 1, Tampa Bay decided to trade him now and get something for him, which I believe was a fifth-round pick. So he's now not only not a Bruin, but he's in Toronto. How do you feel about that? Are you upset? Are you relieved? Are you glad? Do you not care either way? I can tell you, I think the Bruins definitely had his name circled as a possibility to add to their team. But Darren Raddysh is now a Toronto Maple Leaf. He is getting a payday of, I want to say, 8.25 AAV and 8 years. Now, his AFP analytics projection for a UFA contract was $8 million at 6 years. So Toronto is definitely giving him some significant term. And for the Leafs, listen, their blue line, we talk about the Bruins blue line needing help. Toronto's blue line, they really need help because Toronto they don't have a McAvoy or a Lindholm or a Zadorov. They have Morgan Riley and Brandon Carlo and Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who had a good year last year, to his credit. And then, Chris Tanev, who has injury issues, and is it Jake McCabe or Brian McCabe? Jake McCabe, right? I think it was Brian McCabe who used to play for the Leafs, but Jake McCabe, I think that's his name. I don't know. I'll double check afterwards. But McCabe, they have McCabe as well. So they enter in Darren Raddysh to their blue line, and Raddysh, he absolutely can wire the puck. And I talked about in terms of the Bruins why Raddysh could be a decent solution for Boston's right side because the Bruins struggle to get shots through from the point, and Darren Raddysh would definitely do that for them. So it's a long-term commitment for Toronto, but I think in the short term, I think it makes sense for the Leafs to bring him in. He definitely helps out their blue line. Okay, so the question now is, what do the Bruins want to do about it? Are they going to get more desperate here? Because now that Raddysh is off the board, are they going to get really desperate and want to sign John Carlson to a 2 or 3 year deal for $9 or $10 million? Are they going to try to bring in a Rasmus Anderson? What's their plan? Now, they don't necessarily have to go out there and acquire a UFA. Like that's totally fine if they don't. You might have to explain to David Pastrnak or Charlie McAvoy if the Bruins go into next year without a legit top four guy added to this team, why they weren't able to do so, whether it's free agency or via trade. So, but I don't listen. If the Bruins don't overextend themselves for an aging veteran that has some risk and they don't lock themselves into a long-term deal, I'm not going to cry about it. I think I've been pretty consistent in wanting to preach patience for this Bruins organization. I think they need to come to grips in reality that they're not a Stanley Cup contending team, nor would they be adding a top four defenseman or a top six forward. Like, they have to do a lot of things here. And I just think that ultimately you're better off trying to do so internally. I think it's the way the league is, because in a hard cap league, it's difficult to pay all these players, max deals or max value deals. You have to have players on younger, you have to have younger players, impact players on entry level deals and their first, deals after that too. And even though the salary cap is rising, right, that kind of presents a new problem. So, okay, in theory, as the cap rises, maybe you could afford more of these players, but at the same time, a lot of these players don't have an incentive to leave where they are because the cap's rising for everybody. So the moral of the story is, whether you're in a situation or a landscape around a league where it's a hard cap and you can't afford to have established guys at every position, or a situation like we're seeing now where the cap is going up, but players are going to elect to re-sign where they are, or if you're lucky, maybe they want to trade to you. You're in a situation where you have to have your own young talent. And so I know it's coinciding with the prime of some of your top players right now. But to me, I think ultimately the Bruins, I just hope that they don't do something stupid this offseason. And doing less, I find it might not be the sexiest offseason, but it's probably more responsible than trying to do too much and mortgaging a lot of your future. So there's deals out there to be had. There's players that I think are on this Bruins roster that if the Bruins can grow some cajoons, that you could try to move those players. And I'm talking about a Pavel Zacha. You can keep Zacha for all you want. And I think he's a good player for the Bruins. And I understand the value of it, right? But if you want to go out there and add some impact players, right, you're going to have to give up something of value. So it's either going to be a Pavel Zacha and a Mason Lohrei and some draft picks, or it's going to be, a Fraser Minton or a James Higgins or a Dean Letourneau and draft picks. And I don't have to tell you guys which ones I would rather not part with, but maybe there's differings of opinions here. So I guess ultimately my question to you all and for the Bruins to have to answer for all of us is Darren Raddysh going to Toronto? If the Bruins are banking on him hitting free agency and signing him, are they now going to turn around and get really desperate and try to bring in a Rasmus Anderson or overpay for him or a John Carlson? And I'm not saying that those guys are bad players in and of themselves, but I guess what's the reaction from the Bruins perspective? We've heard Kim Neely talk about how the Bruins are going to be aggressive this offseason. We know that they're going to try to go out there and appease the McAvoys and the Pasternaks of the world because, they want to let their top players know that they're trying to give them some help. So we'll see. We'll see. I hope the Bruins don't do something stupid. That's my takeaway, but time will tell. I wanted to touch briefly on Patrice Bergeron. The Boston Bruins announced that his number is being raised to the Garden Rafters at a date to be determined next season. And I believe that he's going to be mentioned on Monday as an inductee to the Hockey Hall of Fame. So it comes as no surprise that Bergeron's number is being retired to the rafters. The fact that it's being done so a single season after they did Chara's is not surprising in terms of Bergeron's merit, but just surprising in terms of maybe I don't really recall any teams really doing like back-to-back ceremonies and giving like for the Bruins before Chara raised his banner last year was I want to say maybe was it Middleton? Middleton, I think, may have been the more recent banner raising some point in the early 20 teens. I could be wrong about that. And then before him, I think it was Cam Neely in 03 or 04, somewhere around there. Ray Bourque was obviously in that time frame too. So they like to space it out sometimes, but hey, I don't care. I mean, get Bergeron up there as soon as possible. And I think that we all have a lot of the same fond memories of Patrice Bergeron. Obviously, Game 7, 2013 against Toronto, I think probably comes to everybody's mind first. The game tying goal during the 4-1 comeback in the third period, the overtime goal to send Boston to the Eastern Conference semifinals. Just stuff of legends. You can rewind the clock a couple of years before too. Game 7 against the Vancouver Canucks. Bergeron with the first goal of the game, and yeah, 2 goals in that game as well with a shorthanded goal, and that shorthanded goal really kind of that goal was like the backbreaker of that game. It's a power play for Vancouver. I want to say it was 2-0 at the time. I think Marchand may have made it 2-0. And Dennis Seidenberg off the glass, and Bergeron just streaks down the middle of the ice, and huge goal. I mean, huge goal. It's again, stuff of legends. Some other big moments: Bergeron's overtime assist to Marco Sturm in the first Winter Classic at Fenway Park. Big moment. He had the overtime winner his rookie year against Montreal in the playoffs. That was a pretty cool moment for a young kid. And, his career was threatened. It was threatened early with the Randy Jones hit from behind back in October of 2007. And it took Bergeron a couple of years to get back to, I would say what he was capable of offensively. It took some time. He came back from that injury the following season, but his offensive confidence and his offensive touch, it took some time to come back to him. So that injury, I think, probably took a lot of points away from his career, not just in the 07-08 season where he missed 95% of the year, but also in some ensuing years. I just felt like it took some time for his confidence to come back offensively, but he overcame that injury. We all know the stuff of legends in 2013 when he was playing with a punctured lung and broken ribs and broken all sorts of things like that he was playing with against Chicago in that finals. So Bergeron he's just an all-timer. He's one of the greatest Bruins to ever play. The way his attention to detail, second to none in terms of hockey IQ. He thought the game at such a high level. He was such a responsible player. His effort was second to none. And I honestly am, very lucky and grateful that I got to watch him as a kid and right through early adulthood. He was somebody that, truly, athletes, they're not always to be looked up to in terms of like the type of people they are, because, just because you're good at a sport doesn't mean that you're the greatest person on earth. But Patrice Bergeron, he really was just like a true professional and somebody that for young athletes and hockey players, the quintessential role model to look up to in terms of how he carried himself both on and off the ice. So good for Patrice Bergeron, very, very well earned. And I will mention a funny story, a little personal story that I have regarding Patrice Bergeron, that in light of the news, I will share here, even though it is kind of a bit embarrassing for me to have to relive. But I'll just paint the scenario here. It was 2021, and even though I still do the skate pod with EEI, I'm not affiliated with them in any other way outside of that. But back in 2019 to 2021, I was doing some part-time producing for them. I was doing some writing for them. And, I eventually left there in those capacities on my own accord to go do my own stuff. But in any event, I remember one time during COVID, or it was the season after COVID. So it was the year the Bruins beat the Capitals in the first round and then lost to the Islanders, and fans were allowed back slowly but steady over the course of that season. And I remember I was talking to Scott, who I do the skate pod with, and I was able to kind of get media access to ask questions after one of the games. But at the time, because it was COVID, none of this was in person, so it was all over Zoom. And I had never been in a media scrum in my life. To this day, I still haven't. It's not something that I would even want to do. It's not really my style. I don't really care to sit there in a scrum and, stick a phone into people's faces. I like to more so comment on what they say afterwards. But, at the time, I was in my apartment, and I remember clicking on this link in an email, and next thing I know, I'm on my couch watching the post-game interview, and I virtually raised my hand to ask a question, and the PR person was like, Brian, WEI. And next thing you know, I'm in my apartment in Boston, and I'm talking to Bergeron, who was in New York after a game against the Islanders, and I was just so confused. Like, is this actually happening? Like, what? The world was in such a weird place at the time. But it was interesting, and Bergeron is somebody I grew up watching, so it was kind of surreal to be having this conversation. And I'm not really somebody who gets starstruck, and but this was a cool moment, and I want to play it here because looking back at this moment, it was the first and only time I ever asked a question as a media member, like in a post-game scrum or anything like that. It's just the way the world was at the time, where I was able to gain access to this. But then after this game, I think they were kind of eliminated the following game or whatever. And then I left EEI in this capacity, and it just never really became a thing going forward. But this question I look back at, and I tried to ask a good question. So many times you have people in the media asking like clickbaity questions or just kind of like, I don't know, just lame questions. And I wanted to give like an actual hockey question for people to listen to and hear his feedback. And he handled it with like a lot of grace and professionalism. And it's like a 40-minute question, I feel like. And he had just lost a playoff game, and here's this young kid just asking a very specific question, and he just didn't make me feel bad about it. Like, he answered the question very professionally and honestly with a lot of thought, and I appreciated that. And I just think so many guys after a game, they would probably like roll their eyes, whether it was visually or in their head, and just kind of give like a nothing answer just to get off the podium. But he took his time to actually answer this question, and I appreciated it. And I feel like this kind of is a small example I can give personally of, how he just made people feel, respected. And so here's that moment, even though it's very cringeworthy for me to listen back to.
Good, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks. I have a question about the power play. Over the years, whether it was Torrey at the top of the umbrella or Matt earlier this year, you guys have always had a great power play. But since Cassidy put McAvoy with you guys in the top unit, it's looked as dangerous as it has all year. Could you just talk about what Charlie may do differently than Torrey or Matt in the past on that top unit, and why you guys are getting a lot of great looks now?
Well, I think he's a right-handed shot, first of all, so that's another difference where he can be shot ready from the point, and that's something that they have to be aware of, coming from a pass from the half wall. Otherwise, he's just a really smart player that makes plays and makes the right decisions at the right time. So it opens up the play on many occasions when he's making that pass or that look off and it goes somewhere else or seams or whatever. So he's just a very smart player that keeps getting better.
Thank you, Patrice.
Thank you.
So, I mean, again, I hear that, and I can't help but kind of cringe, because here I am asking the guy a very detailed question after a playoff loss, and he probably want to know part of it. But again, like, he gave like a thoughtful answer, and I like to think I tripped up a little bit and caught him off guard, because he was probably used to answering questions that were just kind of, yes or no questions, and I gave him an actual hockey question. So at the time, yeah, Grzelcyk was on the power play a lot, and then they moved McAvoy on the power play, and this is like the first time that McAvoy had power play 1 minute since he was in the pros, because Torrey Krug was that guy. And then when Krug left town, which was this season, to start this season pretty much, they went with Grzelcyk at first, and the power play was kind of blah, and they finally went to McAvoy, and it looked a lot better. Now, as history would tell us, McAvoy kind of struggled on the power play at times over ensuing seasons. He did a good job this past year, but at the time, it did offer a different look, and it looked good right away. And as Bergeron said, him being a righty offered different looks and all that stuff. So it was a fun question, and just thinking back on that version of myself, kind of feeling nervous, talking to somebody I grew up watching, and again, it was so surreal, like not because of the fact that I was talking to Bergeron. It was because I was in my apartment in Boston, and I'm watching a game on my laptop, and now I'm talking to the players on my laptop. It was such a weird time in the world that it was just so like interesting. But anyway, small personal example that I was lucky enough to kind of have to feel like I wasn't just wasting people's time with that question. And I feel like other athletes in this position could have made me feel like an asshole, or made me feel, weird for asking a longer detailed question, but he handled it with grace, and I always appreciated that. And so, yeah, good for Bergeron to be raised to the Garden Rafters, and one of the greatest Bruins to do it. So feel free to leave your Bergeron comments below, your favorite memories, where you think he ranks all time in terms of Bruins greats, and a very, very deserving Hall of Fame induction, we think, in coming days here. And look forward to that celebration for Bergeron later on next season. So that'll do it for this episode. Thank you all very much for listening. Next week will be very busy. We have the draft. We have free agency coming up. I think it's going to be a lot of news dropping, and I'll be here to cover all of it. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.